This ESPN report has everyone heads turning as an undrafted rookie has been the Vikings' biggest offseason surprise with a ton of upside heading into training camp. And another outlet puts Minnesota at the top of a certain group ranking that is going to be a problem for opposing teams as long as the quarterback play is consistent. We're going to break down all of that in this episode of Vikings Digest. But first, before we get into today's video, this video is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 sports pick app and the best way to get on all the action. We're going to dive into some awesome promotions later on, but make sure to download the app using the link in the description or the pinned comment and use code DIGEST to sign up today. New users will get $50 instantly in their lineup when playing their first $5, and it'll help out the channel a ton. And with that, let's hop right into the first topic of the day, which is that the Dillon Bell hype is real, as ESPN put out an article that was talking about each team's biggest offseason surprise for their current roster, and Dillon Bell was the selection for the Minnesota Vikings, saying that it can be difficult to gauge receiver skills in skill sets in spring practices when NFL rules prohibit physical coverage techniques. But it was eye-opening to see Bell, an undrafted rookie from Georgia, working extensively with the second team during drills. That placement spoke volumes about his initial impression with Vikings coaches, who in essence were putting him in the early mix to be the number 4 wide receiver behind Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Juwan Jennings, which will make this wide receiver depth just absolutely insane if Dillon Bell can fulfill all the promise that it seems that he has on paper. And it's crazy that all these teams kind of passed on him, because when you look at his pre-draft analysis, Lance Zierlein was saying on his outlet, saying that he is a big, strong, explosive receiver requiring specific usage on the next level. Bell is top-notch with the ball in his hands on reverses, jet sweeps, and quick hitches. He has the ability to create chunk runs after breaking tackles. And when he was drafted, we kind of had heard that he was a little bit kind of like a Deebo Samuel type player, where he has the ability to be useful in the run game on jet sweeps. So that could be very useful on some 4th and 3rd down shorts that Kevin O'Connell didn't really have in his bag before that he could do. I know Jordan Addison was the one who got us that long touchdown against the Detroit Lions. It was really the only glimmer of offense we had in that game because Max Brosmer was quarterback and was on a jet sweep. But if you got a guy like Dillon Bell, who's a little bit bigger, a little bit faster, and has a little bit more physicality to him, that is something that Minnesota can absolutely use as an asset, especially when they have the running back room that they have, which we're going to dive into in another video later on. So stay tuned for that, because there's a lot of stuff going on as far as how this roster is going to shake up heading into not only training camp, but also once the preseason hits and that final 53-man roster. And I definitely think Dillon Bell is going to be on that, because when you look at what he had in college, it's a surprise that he did go completely undrafted. In his 4 collegiate seasons, he got 119 passes for 1,269 yards and 11 touchdowns, adding another 373 and 5 scores on the ground. Bell also completed 1 of 3 pass attempts on an 18-yard touchdown and 6 kick returns on his resume. Now, we know that Myles Price was the darling last year as far as the kick returns went, but if we have a tandem where this is how Dillon Bell makes the roster, I know we've seen with guys like even Adam Thielen, Danny Amendola, Julian Edelman, these guys started as returners that worked their way up into ultimately being a wide receiver 1 for the respective teams. Is Dillon Bell going to be the future wide receiver 1 for Minnesota? No, not as long as Justin Jefferson is there, because he's the best wide receiver in the league. But could he work his way up to being a number 4 or even a number 3 receiver after Juwan Jennings maybe leaves? That is absolutely something worth monitoring, because Ty Felton, we drafted him last year, didn't really turn out the greatest last year because Jalen Naylor just outcompeted him and just competed into a contract with another team. So that did work out well for Felton in that sense. But now, as soon as he thinks that, all right, the wide receiver 4 spot is mine, Dillon Bell comes rolling in here from Georgia and is ready to just absolutely steamroll all over that. And I know that's not going to be looking good for him, but if he gets put on kick returns with Myles Price could be concerned for his job, but I don't think he's going anywhere because he's been so solid on kick returns. But if you put Dillon Bell back there with him, those are 2 returners that teams are going to have a very big problem dealing with, because Myles Price, he would have had a couple of those touchdowns last year. Some of them were called back because of penalties that were just absolutely stupid. Don't know how Matt Daniels ended up keeping his job as a special teams coordinator, but he still is back for another year. Hopefully he can shape up some of those things and get the guys a little bit more disciplined, not to take blocking the back calls, not to take holding calls or anything like that. That'll negate a big return or just a return touchdown. That could be the momentum shifter in that game. So you put Dillon Bell back there, I think that gives him a very big opportunity to work his way up through the depth chart into that wide receiver 4 spot, because we're just going to see more of him, because he'll have those opportunities from the punt returns that Ty Felton is simply not going to be getting as being the 4th option for JJ McCarthy or Kyler Murray. So it brings a big ceiling as well for Dillon Bell, where if he plays his ass off in the punt return game, works his way up to being a reliable option in the passing game as well because of what he can showcase in the punt returns that Ty Felton is not getting that chance to do. That'll go very well for his chances at being that next future wide receiver 3 for Minnesota once Jauan Jennings leaves. And as far as what A to Z Sports was saying as far as their roster projections, they dropped a big article on the Vikings roster and who they predict will be in the final 53-man roster, predicting some cuts and some makes. And Dillon Bell was one of the guys that was in on that, as he said Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jauan Jennings, Ty Felton, Miles Price, and Dillon Bell. Obviously, Miles Price being the kick return is great for us. And the last time they broke down the projected 53-man roster, they didn't know what the roster would look like at wide receiver. They hadn't signed Jauan Jennings yet, and it raised the questions about the group as a whole. Now that Jennings is in tow, it's a much clearer group to parse out. The depth players are fascinating. Ty Felton feels like a lock, not due to his ability as wide receiver, but his special teams acumen. But I think Miles Price and Dillon Bell are going to get that edge. There is ability yet to be extracted on offense, and year 2 could get it out of him. After those 4, Price is currently stated on the roster due to his return ability and could be unseated there, and Bell continues to get praise across the board. Now, that praise that Bell is getting, I don't think he's competing with Miles Price for a job. He's going to be competing with Ty Felton for a job. So Ty Felton going into back-to-back years, he's going to have to fighting for his job. Ty Felton was a fairly high draft pick for the Vikings that they had just a season ago. So they want to see something out of him, but they're putting him in these situations where maybe they should have put JJ McCarthy in, where he's having to compete with these guys for that wide receiver 3 or now wide receiver 4 spot now that Jauan Jennings is there. So I'm going to be very interested to see how this all shakes up for Minnesota. And what do you guys think? Do you think that Dillon Bell is making the 53-man roster? And do you think he's going to steal that wide receiver 4 spot, especially if he gets put on kick returns and eventually unseats Ty Felton's job? Let us know down in the comments below, as that's going to take us into the second topic of the day, which is that the Vikings were named best wide receiver group in the NFL, and I couldn't believe this, but Bleacher Report, they dropped an article on it ranking the wide receivers NFL's best wide receiver groups after the A.J. Brown trade, and there were some teams on there like the Bengals, the Cowboys, the Rams, the Ravens, and things like that, but then the Minnesota Vikings showed up at number 1, and I was very surprised to see this. I was scrolling down the list, expecting them to be at probably about like 3, 5, and then when I saw the numbers keep going and Minnesota wasn't popping up and it got to 2, I thought, holy crap, they are going to be ranked number 1. And it is for good reasons, as their top 3 wide receivers are Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jauan Jennings. All 3 guys were, obviously Justin Jefferson is number 1, but Jordan Addison, Jauan Jennings could make a case for being a wide receiver 1 on any other team really at this point that needs a wide receiver 1. You look at Miami, you look at some of the other teams as well floating around out there, like Tennessee, they could use another guy. His Carnell Tate is just a rookie, and some other teams around the league, Arizona could use one like that as well. The Minnesota Vikings may not know who their quarterback will be in 2026, but one thing is for sure, whoever that quarterback is has a loaded cadre of wideouts at his disposal. The group is headlined by Justin Jefferson, arguably the best wide receiver in the league. I don't think it's an argument, really. His 1,048 receiving yards and 12.5 yards per reception last year were both career lows, but had a lot more to do with the quarterback playing the Twin Cities than anything Jefferson did, and as well as just the multitude of quarterbacks he's had cycling in there over the past couple of years as well that weren't named Kirk Cousins, so it hasn't been very consistent there. But it goes on saying that the 7th-year veteran has never failed to hit 1,000 yards in a season, has averaged over 90 receiving yards a game for his career and reeled in 42 touchdowns. Jordan Addison may not be Jefferson, and his 25 season was the worst of his 3 years in the league, but he has shown a nose for the end zone, scoring 19 touchdowns over his first 2 years in the pros. That's a very big weapon in the red zone that Minnesota absolutely needs. Add in Jauan Jennings, who had 132 catches, 15 touchdowns over the past 2 years. And you have a trio of experienced, productive pass catchers and a nightmare for opposing defensive coordinators. And I absolutely agree with this. The only problem is, of course, who is going to be quarterback? Will they be consistent enough? Will they get these guys the ball? Because that was the biggest thing last year, is that we saw that Carson Wentz, he was able to get Jordan Addison the ball, not Justin Jefferson as much. Jordan Addison, he was eating, he was enjoying life. Then you bring in Max Brosmer, he couldn't do anything. JJ McCarthy, it was up, down, all the way around. Mainly Jalen Naylor was his best receiver that he had last year, but he still found ways to get it to Jefferson, just not very often, and was very much off target a lot of the time. So if JJ can refine those tools and he's a starting quarterback, hopefully he can bounce back on that. Then on the other side, if Kyler Murray's there, he's got a lot to prove, so hopefully he can kind of have that resurgent comeback season like Sam Darnold had. So there's a lot of variables here, I know, that are holding Minnesota back from truly being the undisputed number 1 wide receiver group or the number 1 ranked offense on paper. But it's all a matter of how that quarterback play is going to be, and we know this as Vikings fans, that the quarterback is everything in Minnesota. When you look at the history of quarterbacks that have started for them, it's been rough over the past 20 years as far as consistency or just finding that franchise guy. And Minnesota is hoping that this season we are going to find out if they have one of those guys or two of them in-house as this competition keeps brewing. So let us know what you guys think down in the comments below. Do you agree that Dillon Bell is going to make the roster or become wide receiver 4? Or do you think that Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and Juwan Jennings make up the best wide receiver trio in the NFL? And if Dillon Bell is the guy that he seems to be, the out of fourth guy in there, it might make it a very hard case to argue against as far as them being the best 4 wide receivers on a team in the NFL. So let us know what you guys think down in the comments below, as that's going to do it for this episode of Vikings Digest. Thank you guys so much for watching, subscribing, hitting that bell icon, and thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. That's going to be it for today. I've been your host, Griffin. Take care.